Today's story is about the 45th Warframe, Lavos. Released on the 18th of December 2020 alongside his signature primary, the Cedo, during Operation Orphix Venom. Lavos is a Warframe that goes by many names and titles. However, to understand Lavos and his story, we must first discuss the Orokin principle of transmutation. We may know transmutation here on Earth as the fable of alchemy or chrysopia, the belief that one can convert base material, specifically lead, into gold. The Orokin feared the myth of transmutation, culturally enriching themselves instead in continuity. For the Orokin were full of conceit and self-aggrandization, but even still respected the law of conservation. It is impossible to turn what already exists into something new, and what if it were possible, what then? The lower members of Orokin society transmuting their way up the ranks through wealth and influence, to ascend the anathema of hierarchical stagnation that rotted the Orokin Empire to its very core? No. The Kuva gives life anew to those deserving through the vessel bodies of lesser beings in their twisted version of Plato's society. It is then that we understand why those amongst the Orokin who dabbled in transmutation were treated as heretics and jailed. One such transmuter, Jarvi, the crawling serpent, was imprisoned at Daboth Kra, a mountain prison formerly hosted atop one of the many peaks of the planet Venus. They say that no single transmuter anywhere in Orokin society was as feared as the former Archimedean Jarvi, and as such, his personally assigned Warden was a powerful Warframe named Lavos. Orokin society spoke so fearfully of Jarvi that some even feared he may face execution by the Jade Light and somehow survive, or perhaps even come back stronger. They had Lavos attend to his position as jailer with utmost excellence, dealing scarce food and water to one that some called the Speaker of Filth, but contrasted this care with beatings severe and plentiful. The idea was that if Jarvi could somehow survive the Jade Light as feared, then they could at least break his will, and use him as an example to those willing to deal in the heretical study of transmutation. Jarvi was a scrawny man clothed in little more than his previously white robe, indicating his former station as a respected Archimedean. He had tattoos that started at his elbows and ended at his wrists, twin coiling snakes. Some theorize these snakes to represent Caduceus and Ouroboros, both symbols of alchemy at some point in our very own history here on Earth. Caduceus first appeared back as far as 4000 BC from Mesopotamian culture as the staff of the Sumerian god Nigin-Jida. The staff was then later adopted in the classical period by the Romans as the staff of Hermes, or Mercury. It became the astrological symbol for the planet of the same name and represented the compound then known as Quicksilver, a component most important in the field of alchemy, and thus where we get our connection from Caduceus to Orokin transmutation. Ouroboros, quite literally on the other hand, has strong ties with ancient Egyptian mythology, and was famously carved into the walls surrounding the casket that held Tutankhamun, boy pharaoh of the ancient Egyptians, a snake devouring its own tail, detailing transmutation in its own way. Death through life, life through death. However, most famously, Ouroboros is closely associated with the legend of the ancient art of chrysopia and the materia prima, the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, a relic said to embody all the principles of alchemy, thus linking our second snake back to the legend of alchemy. Now, back to the origin system of Warframe. Our jailer Lavos had other imprisoned Orokin that he served as Warden for, but many claimed that his personal visits to Jarvi resulted in beatings that the other prisoners may have felt relief weren't aimed at them, or horrified at what Jarvi was subject to. This is to say that Lavos was a cruel warden to Jarvi. Other prisoners even claimed that Lavos beat him so hard that Jarvi was able to use his own life essence, his blood, to create vast illustrations across the walls of his cell detailing even the finest elements of transmutation, his magnum opus, the sum of his life's work. Some even noted that they had noticed a full portrait of Lavos, complete with his Vitam Sciendana, his token of office, among the crazed ramblings strewn across Jarvi's cell walls. The scrawlings and writings and drawings were viewed by the commanding Orokin as a continuation of his heresy, and thus Lavos was ordered to beat the former Archimedean even harder than before. He neglected his beatings of other inmates under his purview simply to punish Jarvi for the apparent slight against Orokin norms. However, if they are to be trusted, Some prisoners claim that during these beatings, Jarvi would stand upright for just a moment, chest to chest with the Cedo-wielding Warframe, and whisper strange things into where his ears would be were Lavos a human, before then receiving the blunt end of the shotgun to the chest once more. It was after all of these private sessions that Jarvi then scrolled a snake across the walls of his cell. Some wondered if he were trying to simply appeal to his heretical idols in a crude effigy made of blood and waste. An Orokin floor washer called Bekran Zaft was a personal witness to these beatings and scrollings during her time at Daboath Kra. She said that the nightmares from the screaming, wailing, bludgeoning and beating still haunt her to the present day. Jarvi's seemingly unbreaking will to serve the heretical treaties of transmutation worried his Orokin jailers, wardens and guards, noting that Lavos had begun completely neglecting the other prisoners entirely, before they would bully their own by pushing each other into Lavos's path to secure a poor felon a beating most magnificent. However, since Jarvi, Lavos would simply wait in place for the prisoner to rush out of his path, before continuing back to Jarvi for what some may consider special attention, or perhaps private lessons. The master of the prisoner decided that Jarvi was simply too dangerous, too willful to be kept alive at the Venusian prison. They ordered his execution, however not by Jade Light. The rumours and shadowed whispers of Jarvi's power were too plentiful to ignore. No, he would be executed by cellular reversal. While the Jade Light was a bath in the most excellent balefire known to the Orokin, cellular reversal was perfect. It would reduce the heretic to mere puddles of cells, no more sentient than the mould that grew on stale bread in the hot, humid Orokin summers. However, no Orokin master wanted to be the one to turn Jarvi into a pile of cellular mass, lest they potentially upset his gods or science and invoke their wrath. So they instead decided that Lavos, his jailer, tormentor, and rumoured student, would become that which ended Jarvi's time in the Origin system, his executioner. On the day of the execution, Lavos donned his new helmet, a new token of station, his Lavos Caudatus headpiece. But with his helmet came new power, the powers of cellular matter itself. Lavos was to be the method of execution for Jarvi. The Warframe personally dressed Jarvi anew for the day, a new robe and hood befitting of the former Archimedean clean and white. Lavos then led Jarvi to the executioner's die, with a slow, solemn, silent stroll. Prisoners watching from the cells, Orokin jailers and royalty all sat together in their seats as if watching a stage play or listening to a bardic poem. Even now they couldn't help but indulge in the occasion, finding an excuse for cruel revelry. The order was given, and just before Lavos lifted his arms to activate his powers of cellular control, Jarvi whispered one final sermon to the astute, attentive Warframe. Then, in a flash, he was turned into a pool of writhing matter. For the Orokin masters, the job was finally done, and Jarvi was out of their hair. However, for Lavos, his work has just begun. He began utilising the countless hours on his studies of transmutation, working it through the new powers his Orokin masters had awarded him, and it was noticed all too late that Lavos was transmuting Jarvi's remains into something anew, a snake circling around his wrist. Not as a tattoo, but as a real appendage made from bioferrous tissue that held Jarvi's very own cognizance. Then a second snake emerged from Lavos' other wrist, a symbol of the change that Jarvi had delivered unto him. His teacher had transmuted Lavos into something more than merely a jailer, to an executioner of justice. The Orokin masters looked up to witness the display before them. The laughing and clinking of glasses stopped with shock and awe before Lavos grasped his Cedo once more and projected himself into the crowd of foul bureaucrats before him, protected by streams of toxin behind him. The only survivor of this day was the floor washer Bekran Zaft. Daboath Kra was subsequently destroyed, all records burnt, and Lavos still out there, somewhere.